Banjo-Kazooie and its sequel, Banjo-Tooie, are classics for a lot of reasons. The fun and charming art style, the memorable music and characters, the incredibly fun gameplay, and much, much more. You could name any one thing about them and make an argument for how and why it contributed to the success and lasting legacy the series has left behind. I talk about a lot of these things in my retrospective series on them, but today I want to focus on one of my favorite things about these games, something that has kept me coming back to them for years: their worlds. Banjo-Kazooie and Banjo-Tooie are both chock full of incredible worlds to play through and explore, along with a few not-so-great ones. Having played through both games recently, I want to have some fun and rank these worlds while they're still fresh in my mind. I'm going to be taking into account various factors, including themes, mechanics, and design, but ultimately I'm just ranking them according to my own preference. Every single level in these games has lots to love about them. My least favorites may be your favorites, and you may absolutely hate the ones I love. I know it's a cop-out, but I think all Banjo worlds are good, even the bad ones. Let me know what your most loved and hated levels are in the comments, and be sure to like and subscribe while you're here. If you're enjoying my videos and you want to support the channel, you can also become a channel member. But let's go ahead and get into this ranking, starting with my personal least favorite level. Pterodactyl Land comes right in the middle of Banjo-Tooie, a prehistoric land of dinosaurs, cavemen, and quite honestly terrible level design. If you watched my Banjo-Tooie video, then you know I'm a huge fan of this game, and I talked a lot about how great its worlds are. Many of them will be at the top of this list. Well, Pterodactyl Land is a T-Rex sized exception to that. The theme is fine, but I still think it's the weakest Tooie has to offer. It has one or two interesting jiggy challenges, but the boss is pretty weak, and even the music isn't quite up to the standard set by other levels. But none of that is what puts Pterodactyl Land at the bottom of this list. This is where the flaws in Banjo-Tooie's game systems come together to create some truly unfortunate level design. There are two dinosaur transformations, and changing between them requires the use of Mumbo, so the amount of running back and forth between Mumbo and Humbawamba to change to the required dinosaur quickly becomes an overwhelming slog. A few people in the comments used this point to try and undermine what I said about the backtracking not being so bad, but I think there's an obvious difference between this and the rest of the game. I can't even enjoy the novelty of running around as a massive T-Rex because of how unnecessarily inconvenient it is. This is bad enough, but the rest of the level is just as cumbersome. Pterodactyl Land single-handedly causes the train mechanic to overstay its welcome, and multiple jiggies require several steps to complete, like long steps. On top of all this, the level is just kind of annoying to traverse, which I wouldn't mind so much on its own, but it's just the cherry on top. It does have some cool exploration, and there are the makings of a great level here. Several people in the comments of my Tooie video named this level as their favorite, which I think is awesome. I love hearing that other people found something to love in it, but I just couldn't quite get there myself. I could go on complaining about Pterodactyl Land, but we have 16 other worlds to cover, so let's just leave it at saying Pterodactyl Land goes out of its way to be annoying, a trait it shares with the next level on this list. Rusty Bucket Bay is the second to last level in Banjo-Kazooie, and it has a well-deserved reputation for being awful. It's a polluted and run-down harbor with a scummy freighter anchored in it. I actually like this theme a lot, but Clanker's Cavern has a similar style and pulls it off a bit better. Similarly to Pterodactyl Land and many of the lower levels on this list, it suffers from the flaws in the game design itself. In Banjo-Kazooie's case, that would be the music notes, which require you to collect them all in one go if you want to get them all. This is annoying even on Banjo-Kazooie's good levels, but it's at its worst in Rusty Bucket Bay. Traversal is ridiculously precarious, and you'll probably be pulling yourself out of the water over and over again, assuming you don't drown or get eaten by the shark. The engine room is notoriously deadly, and while I actually enjoy the platforming here, it makes collecting notes that much more difficult. And on top of this, some of the notes are hidden away quite well, and every second you spend trying to find them raises the chance that you'll die and have to start over. Overall, Rusty Bucket Bay just isn't fun, and if you ask me, it's Banjo-Kazooie at its worst. Alright, time to make some enemies. Click Clock Wood is one of Banjo-Kazooie's most popular levels, and one of my least favorites. The forest theme is extremely basic and actually kind of bland, but it makes up for this by splitting the world into 4 zones representing the 4 seasons. As I stated in my Banjo-Kazooie video, Click Clock Wood does a lot of cool and creative stuff, but it's overshadowed by clunky design and unnecessarily tedious challenges. Collecting all the notes is horrible, and it's easy to miss notes and be forced to run back and forth between the seasons looking for them. The tree would be a really nice centerpiece, but it's in quadruplicate, and the different seasons don't do enough to make scaling it over and over interesting or rewarding. It has some really creative and dynamic jiggy challenges, but some of them require multiple steps, and this on top of everything else can make the world feel extremely tedious. The bee transformation is limited to just the spring section of the level, making it completely insignificant. I know I'm in the minority on this one, but Click Clock Wood just doesn't work for me. I keep going back to it, expecting to have my mind changed, but each time I'm just reminded why I hated it as a kid. A lot of people like it for a lot of good reasons, I'm just not one of them. Cloud Cuckoo Land is Banjo-Tooie's final level, and although its absurd and wacky theme is great and it has some interesting moments, it just isn't fun to play. Getting where you want to go is always a confusing and clumsy trial, which fits the theme perfectly, but it's still annoying. Everything is just so segmented and inconveniently placed, and of course one mistake means you're falling to your death, though that isn't as big of a deal in Banjo-Tooie. The bee from Click Clock Wood returns, and while it has a few upgrades and it can be fun to buzz around the islands in the sky, it still isn't implemented that well. I like how the central cavern serves as a nexus to get from place to place, but I somehow always feel lost in this world no matter how long I play it. Again, that adds to the disorienting absurdity of the world, but that doesn't make it fun to play. Of course, Cloud Cuckoo Land's greatest crime is that it's home to the most universally reviled and infamous jiggy challenge of all time. Can you guess what I'm talking about? That's right, it's Canary Mary. This is a race that requires you to tap a button as fast as you can. I'm always instantly salty about button tapping because my brother always beat me on these stupid tapping minigames in Mario Party. He was like a demon, it was never even close. Canary Mary pops up first in Glitter Gulch Mine, but in Cloud Cuckoo Land, it's 10,000 times worse. It lasts an obscenely long time, and you have to tap really fast, like unreasonably so. I almost couldn't do it, I was almost physically incapable of completing this challenge. I had to use a pin and pause it to take breaks. And to add insult to injury, they have the absolute gall to make you do it a second time for a Cheeto scroll. It's horrible, I never want to do it again. But realistically, one jiggy challenge doesn't ruin the whole level, and it does some things well. I really like the boss, Minji Django. He provides a tough challenge and a robotic, evil Mumbo makes for a surprising twist. It interacts with Hailfire Peaks and Pterodactyland in some fun ways, and I really like some of the sub-areas and the challenges they provide. Overall, I think Cloud Cuckoo Land does just enough to claim a spot above the others I've listed. Bubble Gloop Swamp comes next, and while it doesn't have as many strident flaws as the previous levels, it's still pretty weak in my book. It consists mostly of deadly swamp water and requires a lot of precarious platforming, similarly to Rusty Bucket Bay. Its main issue is that it's just kind of unremarkable, and I don't personally enjoy the theme or music that much. The crocodile transformation is cool, but every time you want to transform you have to run through this big maze in the swamp boots, which can be pretty frustrating. I think the jiggy challenges overall are relatively weak, a mix of basic platforming and frustrating minigames. It's just kind of forgettable, and it doesn't hold up to many of Banjo-Kazooie's levels. Clanker's Cavern is a level I actually like quite a bit, but I can't deny that it has some pretty big flaws. Most of the level is submerged, and while I don't actually mind underwater gameplay, it can be really hard to see in some sections, making it even harder to navigate. There are very few locations to get out of the water, so if you keep falling in, it could get old pretty quick. That being said, I do like the theme and music quite a bit, and it boasts a diverse set of jiggy challenges. Clanker gives the level a nice little centerpiece, and I like the dynamic way he's implemented. I've heard a lot of people say that this is their least favorite level in the game, and while I completely understand that, to me it's a mix of good and bad. 11th is Mumbo's Mountain, not because it does anything particularly bad, but because it doesn't do anything particularly good. And that's to be expected. It was the first level of Banjo-Kazooie, and it serves as an introduction to the game's formula and mechanics. It's very small and extremely easy, it only took me 15 or 20 minutes to complete. But it's cute and colorful and charming, and I really like the music. It manages to be really memorable in spite of how open and shut it is, and it's hard not to have a lot of nostalgia for it. The tribal theme works and fits Mumbo perfectly, the termite is cute, and it's still fun to explore even with as small as it is. It was a strong start for Kazooie, but it's nowhere near the heights later levels would achieve. Mad Monster Mansion is the first to make my top 10, and I like it a lot. Its theme is pretty basic, just a spooky haunted mansion, but I actually don't mind that. Most of Kazooie's themes are fairly straightforward, and while I do highly prefer the deeper and more realized themes of Tooie, this approach fits Kazooie well. I like how Mad Monster Mansion ties into Gruntilda, almost like this is her house. It's kinda tough, but not in a frustrating, overbearing way. It's fun to explore and find little hidden areas, and it isn't too much of a pain to complete. The Halloween theme might be basic, but it's executed well and makes good use of the concept. The pumpkin transformation is one of my favorites. It's as rudimentary as they come, but bouncing around as a funny little pumpkin is just too much fun. I'm always happy to return to this level, even if it isn't one of my favorites. Number 9 is Grunty Industries, a grimy, smog-spewing factory full of underpaid workers and toxic waste. I like this level a lot, but many people in the comments of my Tooie vid were quick to point this one out as their least favorite. And honestly, I completely understand that. There are 5 different floors to explore here, not including the exterior and roof section of the factory, and it can be kind of tricky to navigate between them with the right character. I can totally see how this would turn some people off, and probably for a lot of the same reasons I don't like Pterodactyland. But for whatever reason, Grunty Industries works for me. Navigating the level was a fun and challenging puzzle on its own, and I found it really rewarding to open new areas and access more and more of the building. Even the parts that should be awful, like the timed challenges where you have to swap between Banjo, Mumbo, and Washing Machine, I found myself enjoying them. Maybe this is how Pterodactyland fans feel. The Washing Machine itself is one of my favorite transformations, if only for the ability to launch underwear at foes. Grunty Industries is one of those where I completely understand the complaints and by all rights should be ranked lower, but I just like it. The theme is incredible and I love the music, and Weldar has what I think is the best gameplay out of all the bosses. It's a top 10 level for me, and I stand by it. Freezeezy Peak is next, Banjo-Kazooie's Christmas level. Like Mad Monster Mansion, the theme is fairly one note, but that can't take away from Freezeezy Peak's charm. I love this level, and the song is on my Christmas playlist every year. The snowman in the middle serves as a fantastic centerpiece, and provides some really nice verticality to the world, making it feel a lot bigger than it really is. It has a mix of really good and kinda bad jiggy challenges, but overall the level is a ton of fun to play through and complete. Like all transformations, the walrus is little more than an extra step, but hey, it's cute. I kinda like these big snowman guys that throw snowballs at you, and they can get pretty annoying if you don't pay attention to them. Aside from the boggy race and the lackluster transformation, Freezeezy Peak is just pure charming fun. It isn't the very best Banjo-Kazooie has to offer, but it's pretty darn close. Glitter Gulch Mine comes in at number 7, and it has some of the strongest theming in the series, in my opinion. I love the music and characters here, and the atmosphere is really nice and homey. Despite taking place entirely underground, this level feels really spacious and open, and although the mini tunnels can be somewhat taxing to navigate, I always enjoy exploring the mines. The dynamite trigger is admittedly completely ancillary, but it's still a creative and unique transformation, and I wish there was more to do with it. Old King Cole is not one of my favorite bosses, but he does have a pretty strong personality, like all the characters in Tooie. In terms of gameplay and challenges, Glitter Gulch Mine is relatively weak, but the overall vibe more than makes up for that, at least for me. It's a somewhat unremarkable world propped up by Banjo-Tooie's great atmosphere and engaging approach to exploration, and it will always be one of my favorites. Treasure Trove Cove is only Banjo-Kazooie's second level, but it ends up being my second favorite level in the entire game. It's similar to Mumbo's Mountain in that it's trivially easy, but that doesn't make it any less fun. The beachy pirate theme is, as with all Banjo-Kazooie levels, simple but effective, and the music is utterly iconic. It's just laid out so perfectly. You can run around in a circle and explore the beach, but there's this really cool mountain in the middle with a lighthouse that you can sail to look out over everything. I like how the music fades away as you go higher, replaced by the sound of wind and waves and seagulls. It's one of the few levels in the game that has something approaching a boss fight, easy as it is, and it has several nice jiggy challenges that fit the theme. I just can't get enough of this level, and I wish it was a bit more substantial. But if the only criticism I can come up with is that there isn't enough of it, that just speaks to the high quality of the world. Before we get into the top 5, I want to do a quick honorable mention round. This will include areas that aren't exactly full worlds, but still deserve some recognition. This section isn't ranked, I'm just going to very quickly talk about the things I appreciate in these areas. First up is Spiral Mountain, the home of Banjo, Kazooie, and ostensibly Gruntilda herself. This is an endlessly charming little paradise, and it's honestly one of Banjo-Kazooie's nicest looking areas. It's fun to explore, and I like that you can hang out in Banjo's house and find collectibles in little nooks and crannies. The music fades away as you cross the bridge to Gruntilda's lair, replaced by a spooky, mischievous melody to establish Grunty's imposing presence. But one of my favorite things about Spiral Mountain is how different it is in Banjo-Tooie. Grunty's actions have wrecked the place completely, leaving it in disarray. The haunting, morose music is a sharp contrast to the happy-go-lucky tune in Kazooie, establishing the darker tone Banjo-Tooie will employ. It's very smart game design, having you start somewhere both familiar and foreign, and it makes Spiral Mountain a very memorable location. Grunty's lair is, in a word, iconic. The music is instantly recognizable and gives the whole game a strong personality. It's compact and segmented, but it's laid out in a creative, non-linear way that can be disorienting in the best way possible. Grunty is so fun and wacky in this game, and though I personally enjoy her caustic, vitriolic attitude in Tooie, I can't deny that Banjo-Kazooie establishes her personality perfectly, and that is reflected in Grunty's lair. Jinjo Village is the home of the Jinjos and their king, and it's one of my favorite places to hang out in either game. The music is happy and inviting, the Jinjo houses are cute and colorful, and Bottle's house is completely adorable. It reminds me of a Hobbit house. There's not much to do in Jinjo Village, but there doesn't have to be. Isle o' Hags takes the place of Grunty's lair in Banjo-Tooie, and it does a fairly good job of it. It isn't as memorable, but there's plenty to explore, and the different locations are quite diverse. It feels a bit more real than Grunty's lair, making the different worlds fit more naturally into the game, and there are several characters that make their home here, including Jiggy Wiggy and Honeybee. It isn't as fun and wacky as Grunty's lair, but honestly, what is? Finally, there's Cauldron Keep, Banjo-Tooie's finale. There isn't much to say about this place. It works really well as a final act, but there's not much here except a couple of boss fights and a trivia quiz. It's impressive and imposing, but I have to say it doesn't hold much of a candle to Grunty's lair. But that wraps up our honorable mention section, so let's get back to the ranking. Kicking off my top 5 is what I consider to be Banjo-Kazooie's best world, Gobi's Valley. It's an Egyptian-themed desert world, complete with a sphinx and several pyramids. It perfectly executes Banjo-Kazooie's formula, with tight playground-style platforming and intense, fast-paced jiggy challenges. It's quite small and densely packed, making it a blast to traverse and complete. Each of the rooms provide a compact, unique, and fun challenge, and this level is uniquely free from the pressure of collecting all the notes, since the world is so small and easy to navigate. There's not much more to say, it's just an excellent level all around, with pretty much no flaws worth speaking of. It's the perfect balance of challenge and fun, and a highlight of every Banjo-Kazooie playthrough. My Ahem Temple is Banjo-Tooie's first level, and it makes a really strong first impression. The theme is excellent and fully realized, with incredible music and a lot of great opportunities for exploration. The Stony is a basic and rudimentary transformation, but I do enjoy the kickball tournament, and being able to talk to other Stonies is a fun novelty. It links up with later levels in some interesting ways, and I really enjoy exploring Targetsen's temple, though I know a lot of people don't like the first-person Breagle Blaster mode. The atmosphere is immersive and appealing, and despite being fairly small and closed off, it feels quite expansive and it's always fun to traverse. My Ahem Temple perfectly establishes the high standard Tooie sets for its levels, and I always enjoy returning to it. Number 3 is Hailfire Peaks, a polarized land of hot and cold. It takes two ideas that would be fairly basic on their own, and combines them to create a really unique and engaging level. This level is at its best when you have to navigate between the two sides of the mountain, and I wish it did a little more of that. There's a ton of areas to explore here, from a volcano to an ice cavern to a kickball arena. It's one of the hardest areas in the game, and overcoming the challenges are always satisfying. The snowball is one of the best transformations, and it interacts with the level itself in really dynamic ways. Chili Billy and Chili Willy are easy and redundant, but they have a lot of personality and spectacle, and they top off the level nicely. Hailfire Peaks just does so much right, and I think this would have made a better final level than Cloud Cuckoo Land. Witchy World is an all-time classic, and in my opinion, the second best Banjo world ever. The theme is utterly perfect, and it captures the atmosphere of a creepy, trashy amusement park masterfully. The music is haunted and whimsical, and the several themed sub-areas make it consistently fun to explore. The music is actually ingenious, giving the world so much character and atmosphere. It also boasts some of the most diverse gameplay in Banjo-Tooie, with several mini-games and carnival attractions to complete. Mr. Patch is my favorite boss fight by far, if just for his incredible theme song. His scale is really impressive, and the way he shrinks and gets faster as you damage him makes the fight really dynamic. The armored car transformation is used in some frankly annoying ways, but it's so much fun to crash through enemies that I have to give it a pass. Witchy World is quite simply Banjo at its very best, and it truly deserves a place at the top. But my number one, most favoritist level of all time is Jolly Roger Lagoon. This is a level that is just so incredibly fun to play, on top of an amazing theme, excellent atmosphere and music, and deep and engaging exploration. I love the concept for this world. You enter into this adorable little pirate town. There are shops that you can buy collectibles from, a hidden beach, and a charming pirate tavern. But then you can dive down into the water to discover a vast underwater world ripe for exploration. There's so much to find here, and the level eliminates the usual drawbacks of underwater levels. This is by far my favorite Banjo world to just spend time in. It's so inviting and relaxing, but it never feels boring. There are many fun and exciting challenges, and you can even transform into a submarine, complete with torpedoes and sonar. I completely missed this in my Banjo-Tooie video and my entire life of playing this game, but you can actually use the submarine to complete many of the underwater jiggies, including the boss fight itself. This is exactly what the other transformations should have been, not just one-off steps to complete specific jiggies, but an alternate way to explore and complete entire portions of the level. This makes the submarine the only transformation to really live up to its full potential. Jolly Roger's Lagoon is just the embodiment of everything I personally love about Banjo-Tooie, and it's one of the best collectathon worlds I've ever played. Bosses have been a staple of video games from the very beginning. Sometimes they provide an engaging challenge, sometimes they give a game some exciting spectacle, and sometimes they're good for nothing but frustration. Many games over the years have come to be known for their boss fights, and Banjo-Tooie is not one of them. Even so, I've always loved these bosses. They provide some fun and varied gameplay, and many of them are quite memorable characters in their own right. So today I want to do a ranking of these bosses from worst to best, and I'll even include the very few from Kazooie. Be sure to like and subscribe while you're here, but let's go ahead and get into this ranking. To start, we have a few from Kazooie that barely even qualify for a boss list. Like, it's a real stretch to call some of these bosses. I don't think they're bad, but obviously they don't hold a candle to a fully realized boss. Bottom of the list is Black Snippet. This just isn't a boss fight, but I guess technically it is a unique enemy that you defeat for a jiggy, and the wiki includes it, so I guess I will too. This is just a very slightly stronger version of the regular Snippet, which can be found in abundance throughout Treasure Trove Cove. This makes it by far the weakest boss fight on the list. Only slightly better are the Zubbas from Click Clock Wood. Not to be confused with Zubba's Nest Shootout from Cloud Cuckoo Land, this is a fight where you have to defeat a set number of wasps for a jiggy. I got stung by a wasp the other day, and it still hurts, so these bastards truly deserve their spot here at the bottom. The yellow flibbits from Bubble Gloop Swamp are similar, but I've never been stung by a frog, so they can go a bit higher. Then there's the Beauty Snippets from Clanker's Cavern. They're similar to the Black Snippet, but I like their weird mutated design, and the way they ambush you in this creepy little room is fun. Nipper is a bit closer to a real boss fight, but he's so unbelievably easy that it's kind of hard to count him. Nipper is a good example of something about all Banjo bosses that I think is pretty funny, and that's that almost none of them are working with Grunty. Like, they aren't really bad guys at all. Nipper is just minding his business, and he even offers to help. Kazooie insults him, he understandably gets his feelings hurt, and then they just beat him up. Several of these conflicts are direct results of Kazooie's big mouth, actually, but hey, what can you do? Boss Boombox calls himself a boss, and I guess I won't contest that, but that doesn't mean he's anything special. Finally, there's Conga, and while he doesn't provide much of a boss fight per se, I do think having to time your eggs and dodge his oranges is fun. But that wraps up our pseudo-boss section, so let's get into the real bosses. Terry is the titular pterodactyl from Pterodactyland, and he's my personal least favorite Tooie boss. One of the things that makes the bosses in this game so great is their personality, aesthetic, and spectacle, and Terry is just kind of weak on all those fronts. I mean, he's just a dinosaur. He blames Banjo and Kazooie for the theft of his eggs, and while they certainly have stolen a lot of eggs over the course of these two games, they are innocent in this case. The gameplay somehow manages to be both extremely easy and kind of annoying. You have to shoot him with eggs as he flies very slowly around his nest, but then the camera flips around to this weird top-down angle as he spits loogies at you. Not very fun, and having my control of the camera taken away is one of my pet peeves in video games. One thing I do like about Terry is his arena. It's at the tippy top of Pterodactyland, high in the sky, and it's just kind of cool. Other than that though, Terry is kind of weak and not very memorable. Chili Billy and Chili Willy are a pair of dragon brothers that inhabit the titular mountains of Hellfire Peaks. I really like their design. Their necks are long and they tower out of the lava and ice, but when you beat them, they fly away to reveal a short, stumpy body. hilarious. They mistake Banjo for a delivery boy, and when they find out that he doesn't have any pizza, they of course decide to eat him instead. The problem with the Chili Boys is that their gameplay is flat and easy, kind of bizarrely so. Hellfire Peaks is one of the hardest levels in Banjo-Tooie, so for these to be as simple and redundant as they are, it's kind of a letdown. You have to launch fire and ice eggs at them from these cannons, then jump over their tongues, then repeat 4 or 5 times. Hellfire Peaks is the only level to have 2 bosses, except for Cauldron Keep, I guess, but the only difference between the 2 of them is what egg type you have to use. I think it would have been better if you had to fight them both at once, but I'm not sure how that would have worked, so I don't know. The music is fantastic, but that goes for every boss from Tooie, so no extra points there. These 2 just don't quite meet the standard set by other bosses, but I still like them. Jolly Roger's Lagoon is my favorite Banjo world, but its boss, Lord Wu Fak Fak, is not one of my favorites. I'm not the biggest fan of his design. I mean, he's just a big anglerfish, but the real issue is that he's just not fun to fight. Having to swim around in first person in this tight, boxed-in arena is clumsy and awkward, and it can be really tough to get an angle on his weak spot. It's hard to see and keep track of where he is, and overall it just isn't a good experience. That being said, you can actually fight him as the submarine, which is extremely cool and unique. The submarine eliminates the need to worry about ammo, and it's more suited to navigating underwater spaces, so it's a really nice option to have. Lord Wu Fak Fak has a really memorable name, and one of my favorite musical tracks in the series, but sadly he just doesn't provide a great gameplay experience. Targitson is a towering, dart-slinging totem god living at the heart of Mayhem Temple. He looks really cool, and he has an incredible theme song, but he's still a bit underwhelming in terms of gameplay. Being the first boss in the game, he's unsurprisingly easy, but that's not an excuse for how utterly brainless this fight is. You fight him in the first-person Breagle Blaster mode, which I don't mind, but yeah, it boils down to you standing in place and shooting the spinning totem faces, while occasionally dodging a dart or killing a Moggy. I could see this being a pretty cool boss fight if its difficulty was ramped up by a factor of 10, but as it is, it just doesn't provide any challenge whatsoever. Still, Targitson knocks it out of the park on aesthetic and spectacle, and that's almost more important to me. Old King Cole is the boss of Glitter Gulch Mine and the owner of Chuffy the Train. You fight him in the boiler of the train itself to earn the right to use it. The fight itself is somewhat unremarkable. You just launch eggs at him as he runs aimlessly around the room, but it does do some interesting stuff. Every once in a while, the boiler heats up, turning the floor to lava and filling the room with deadly gas. This makes the fight dynamic, though it remains pretty easy. Old King Cole himself is pretty funny though. His arms fall off as you damage him, but he remains in denial as more and more of him falls apart. By the end, he's just a pair of legs walking around, and that's always good for a laugh. He doesn't have the best gameplay or the most impressive spectacle, but I think he does enough to earn a spot here. Klungo is next, one of my favorite Banjo characters. He's painfully loyal to Grunty, to a self-destructive degree. You fight him at 3 different points in Banjo-Tooie, and there are differences each time, but I'm going to rank them all as 1. He drinks a potion each time, each one with a different effect. Which one you get at which point is actually entirely random, so that's pretty cool. One of his potions grows him into a giant, and he'll jump up and try to land on you. One of them splits him into 3 copies of himself, and you have to guess the right one. The third one turns him invisible, and you have to spot him fading in and out and attack him. In all 3 variants, each time you damage him, he pauses to fling vials of something nasty at you. All 3 fights are incredibly easy, but they give Klungo a fun and quirky personality. Each time you beat him, he shows up the next time looking bruised and battered, as Grunty beats him for his failures. When you beat him a 3rd and final time, he's finally had enough of her abuse and decides to switch sides. Like I said, Klungo is one of my favorite characters, and I like the progression that takes place between each fight, making him a fun and memorable boss. The Hag 1 is Grunty's drill tank thing, and it serves as Banjo-Tooie's final boss. I like how ridiculously threatening this thing is, and it provides quite an imposing spectacle. That being said, I think this boss fight is a bit overbaked, if that makes sense. You have to switch back and forth between regular gameplay, Breagle Blaster, and even Cuckoo Eggs. Grunty pops out to ask trivia questions, and if you answer correctly, her attacks are easier to dodge. This is funny and creative, but it does kind of interrupt the fight and mess up the pacing. I think there's just a bit too much going on here overall, and honestly it feels like a clunky mess sometimes. But the atmosphere and spectacle does a lot for it. Grunty is an awesome villain, and she has some great dialogue here. I really like when she lets slip that her last name is Winky Bunyan, and immediately tries to walk it back. Sending a clockwork bomb into the exhaust to damage the machine from inside is cool, even if it does make the fight feel more segmented. It's pretty difficult without the honeyback cheat, which makes it satisfying to complete. In spite of its flaws, I think it's a pretty good final encounter with Grunty, making the game go out with a bang. Minji Jongo is an evil robotic clone of Mumbo, and one of the coolest Banjo bosses, in my opinion. It's a really clever twist, and I imagine it caught a lot of players off guard. The gameplay is simple but challenging, and the difficulty ramps up quickly as you damage him. He teleports around this facsimile of Mumbo's house, spamming spells at you faster and faster. The window to attack him can be pretty tight, and it's a lot of fun and quite satisfying to pull off. I like the intense remix of Mumbo's theme, and the visual detail of Jongo's disguise falling apart as he takes damage is pretty cool. It's a great boss fight with a strong identity, and it's actually my favorite thing from Cloud Cuckoo Land. Grunty Industries' boss is Weldar, a massive welding machine with vision problems, and while his personality and design isn't quite as strong as a few others, his gameplay more than makes up for that. It's pretty challenging, and the difficulty increases as you go, which I always like. He launches fireballs and minions at you, and you damage him by launching a grenade egg down his throat while he tries to vacuum you up. After you damage him a few times, he electrifies the floor, which makes everything more difficult. The window to get a grenade egg down his throat before he drags you across the electricity becomes really tight, and even defeating the little minions is complicated when you have to hop from tile to tile. It's just a really fun challenge, and it actually matches the general difficulty level of the world, which most of the bosses don't do. On a purely mechanical level, it might be the best boss battle Banjo-Tooie has to offer. But my favorite Tooie boss fight is, and probably always will be, Mr. Patch. He has a strong personality and a great sense of scale and spectacle. He's a big balloon dinosaur hiding in Witchy World's Big Top, and of course it's Kazooie's trash talk that sets off the conflict. You have to hit his mini patches to blow holes in him, using either grenade eggs or beak bomb. Once you damage him the first time, boxing gloves begin punching up out of the ground, forcing you to take to the sky. This adds a bit of strategy to the fight, and I recommend taking out the hardest to reach patch first. Once in the air, he launches big explosive beach balls at you, but the challenge here is less about staying alive and more about landing hits. And this isn't as easy as it sounds. He walks around the arena, slowly at first, but as you damage him he becomes smaller and faster, making him much harder to hit. It's a fantastic boss fight with great dynamism and progression, but it's really the whimsical fun and spectacle that elevates it for me. Mr. Patch is everything a Banjo boss should be, and he'll always be an iconic classic in my book. Even so, not even Mr. Patch can top the first real boss fight of the series, that of course being Gruntilda herself. Banjo-Kazooie's final boss is the perfect note to end the game on, capturing the fun, fairy tale atmosphere of the game, and of course the wacky, mischievous personality of Grunty herself. Gameplay-wise, there's a lot going on here, and it isn't a walk in the park. It starts with Grunty trying to run you down on her broom, cackling gleefully as she does so. The sound design is excellent, with her broom making ridiculous engine noises and sputtering and backfiring when it breaks down. This is only the first stage though, and over the course of the fight you'll have to fire eggs at her from afar and take to the skies to chase her down, braving an onslaught of spells all the while. To end the fight, you have to awaken these Jinjo statues, while Grunty hurls an absolute barrage of deadly magic at you. Everything here is implemented so creatively and lovingly, and the developers went so far out of their way to make this a memorable encounter, from the music and sound design to the animations and Grunty's dialogue, and of course the unique set of gameplay challenges required to finish her off. It's honestly one of my favorite parts of Banjo-Kazooie, and it's an incredible accomplishment to have such a well-designed and fun boss fight in a game that otherwise includes very little combat. In my opinion, it outshines all the bosses from Tooie, making it the best boss fight in the series. One of the many things that makes Banjo-Kazooie and Banjo-Tooie so much fun to play through is the incredibly diverse approach they take to gameplay. Whether they're exploring, battling enemies, or flying through the air, Banjo and Kazooie can interact with the worlds around them in so many ways. Over the course of both games, Bottles and Jam Jars teach the Baron Bird a slew of moves that allow for different methods of traversal and puzzle solving. But one of the most unique mechanics from these games is the transformations. In Kazooie, Mumbo can turn Banjo into a number of animals, and also a pumpkin. In Tooie, Humba Wumba fulfills the role, and her transformations were a bit more creative, but we'll get to all that, as today I'm going to be ranking all of these transformations. I'm going to take into account their design, creativity, and applications, but I also want to recognize that the primary function of these transformations is just to be fun. Even at their worst, they provide a whimsical little twist, and they give these games a lot of personality. With that said, let's get started on this ranking, and feel free to list your own favorites in the comments. The walrus from Freezeezy Peak might be adorable, but unfortunately I have to put it at the bottom of my ranking, as I think it's the perfect example of all the flaws with this system. The only unique property it has is that it can withstand the freezing water, but this is only useful to collect a tiny handful of notes that you could just get with Wonderwing, and I think maybe one empty honeycomb. There are 2 Jiggies to collect with the walrus, and both of them are quite underwhelming. One of them you just get from another walrus, like all you have to do is talk to him while in walrus form. The other is a sled race, and there's no reason you couldn't ride this sled with Banjo. It's completely arbitrary. It's unfortunate, because Freezeezy Peak is one of my favorite levels, and I do love this little guy's design, but his application is lackluster and he's just kind of boring to play as. The Stony is Banjo-Tooie's first transformation, and similar to the walrus, it's just kinda boring. You can waddle around and slide attack enemies, and you can understand these little statue guys, but the Stony's primary function is to allow access to the kickball tournament. I actually kinda like this minigame, but since it is a minigame with unique mechanics, it doesn't make use of the transformation in any interesting way, just like the sled race. The Stony is a unique and creative idea, and it gives access to some funny dialogue and encounters, but I think it's weaker than the rest of the entries on this list. Glitter Gulchmine's Detonator transformation has a lot of potential, and I really like the idea. It handles in a clunky but fun and entertaining way, bouncing haphazardly, and I could see it being used in some really fun and unique platforming challenges, but this never happens. You can explode yourself to damage enemies and destroy obstacles, but this causes you to lose health. I really like this idea, and again it could have been used creatively, but the only thing you can really do with it is blow up a few piles of rubbles that are blocking passages. And doing this doesn't even make you lose health. I would have liked to see a section where you have to get past a bunch of enemies and tight platforming, while making sure you have enough health to blow up certain objects along the way. Sadly, the Detonator never realizes any of this potential, so I have to give it a low ranking. The bee can be found in both Banjo-Kazooie and Tooie, but this entry is specifically for the Kazooie version, found in Click Clock Wood. I'm infamously not a fan of this level at all, and that extends to its transformation. It can fly, which sets it apart from the other transformations in this game, and I would be ranking it much higher if it could leave the spring section of the level. For whatever reason, the bee is locked to this one area of the level, which makes it pretty much entirely pointless. This is especially frustrating because being able to use the bee across the entire level would make collecting the notes much less of a problem, and overall I think it would have made the level better. As it is, I don't even understand why they bothered putting a transformation in this level at all. I'm sure it is used for a Jiggy or two, but for the life of me I can't remember them. It's definitely mishandled, and contributes to making Click Clock Wood feel segmented and clumsy, at least for me. The pumpkin is potentially the most basic transformation in either of these games. It has no unique mechanics or attributes to speak of besides being small, but I like it quite a bit. Ironically, despite being so basic, it has better application than any of the transformations I've listed so far. It gives you an alternate way to traverse the dangers of Mad Monster Mansion, and it's fun to explore the little nooks and crannies for secrets and collectibles. Going down the toilet is a highlight of this level. This is a good example of how you can make this mechanic fun without doing something totally wacky, and while I still have to put it on the lower end of the list, I'll always defend the pumpkin. The termite was the first Banjo transformation ever, and it was a good introduction to the mechanic. There's not much to do with it, but I really like being able to climb around on these steep surfaces, and making the other termites jealous with my awesome swag. Since Mumbo's Mountain is so open, this is a completely viable way to explore it, and you can collect a huge chunk of the notes and several Jinjos just running around as a cute little termite. There's not too much to say about it, but I think it was a perfect way to familiarize players with the concept of transformations, and I always enjoy returning to it. In Banjo-Kazooie, Mumbo performed the transformations, but in Tooie, you can actually play as Mumbo, and I'm going to count it as a transformation since it kind of fills the same role. He handles similarly to Banjo, and you can zap enemies with his wand, but his main job is using Mumbo pads to do magic. His magic does different things on each level, like powering amusement park rides or bringing characters back to life. I love Mumbo, and when I was a kid, playing as him was its own reward, but playing it now, I have to say that it doesn't quite hold up. Banjo-Tooie is already a game that gets bogged down by unnecessary mechanics, and I talk about that in my retrospective video on that game. A lot of the time, having to change to Mumbo just kinda turns into an annoyance. But I still think it is a fun inclusion, and I wouldn't want to take it out of the game. It just could have been implemented better. The van from Witchy World is one of the most fun transformations on this list, if you ask me. You can putt around and ram enemies, and it's completely invincible. This is the only reason I'm ranking it this highly, since its actual uses are pretty lame. You can open these doors by honking at them, and you can pay to open this area of the level, and that's pretty much it. It's a good example of how this can still be a fun mechanic, even when it isn't done that well. You spend the vast majority of these games playing as Banjo and Kazooie, with each of them lending moves to the diverse control scheme. But Banjo-Tooie introduced a mechanic that allows you to split the duo up and play as them individually, and I figured I might as well include them here. Banjo loses all the mobility Kazooie offers on his own, making him much slower and less fun to play as. But what I really like about playing as Banjo is all the different ways you can use his backpack. He uses it to attack, he can sleep in it to regain health, he can hide in it and bounce around to get through hazards, and hop around in it like a sack to protect his bare feet. There are some creative uses for these mechanics, and it does enough to make him interesting to play as. Okay, so I've gone on record multiple times talking about how much I hate Pterodactyland, and that extends to its transformations, Baby and Daddy T-Rex. The very few uses they have are implemented terribly, and it contributes to making this level kind of awful to play. That being said, dinosaurs are cool, and stomping around as a massive T-Rex is fun enough on its own to justify a placement here. This one is carried entirely by its spectacle and style, so we will forgive its transgressions this once. The bee returns in Cloud Cuckoo Land, and it's much improved. It can shoot darts and do a speed boost, but the biggest improvement is just that it can access the whole level, and with this constraint lifted, it's actually a pretty fun transformation. It only has a couple of jiggies, and one of them is a minigame that easily could have been done with Banjo and Kazooie. In fact, there's a pretty much identical minigame in Witchy World, which makes this one a bit redundant. But the bee is still fun to buzz around and shoot things with, and I'm glad they brought it back. Kazooie spends all her time stuck in Banjo's backpack, so it's refreshing to see her get a chance to stretch her legs. Besides a couple of fun minigames and a few interesting jiggies, she's mostly used for hatching eggs, which is kind of boring, but I like playing as Kazooie a lot. She's just fun. She's quick and nimble, meaning you can cover ground much faster with her, and she can jump really high and glide through the air. Her health is low and her attacks are weak, so you have to be a bit more careful with her. It's just a nice change of pace, and like most everything on this list, I wish there was more to do with her. Bubblegloop Swamp is not one of my favorite levels in Banjo-Kazooie, but it is home to my favorite transformation from that game, the crocodile. It's by far the most fleshed out. It can navigate the dangerous swamp water with ease, and it's also the only Banjo-Kazooie transformation to have an attack. This is mainly used in a minigame that I don't enjoy that much, but it's a minigame that actually uses the unique control scheme of the crocodile itself, so I respect it for that. It also just looks kinda nice. Definitely one of the better transformations, and it makes my top 5. Hellfire Peaks is one of my favorite Banjo worlds, and its transformation makes really good use of its unique premise. It's a big snowball, complete with shorts and backpack, and it's right at home on the snowy side of Hellfire Peaks. Taking damage will cause you to shrink, but rolling around in the snow will make you grow and regain health. Things get complicated when you have to go to the lava side of the level. The heat causes you to slowly melt and take damage, so you gotta move quick. I really like this, but you only have to do it once, which is a shame. This was probably a conscious decision, and I understand it, since I've heard people point this out as one of their least favorite jiggies in the game, but I think they should have committed to it and included more sections where you have to traverse the lava side. Even so, the snowball is creative and fun enough to earn a spot at the top of the list, and it's one of my favorites. Grunty Industries is a level many people hate, and for a lot of good reasons. I am not one of those people, even though it suffers from many of the same flaws that make me dislike other levels. It just works for me, and while I can't really justify this opinion, I will say that one of the many things I like about it is its transformation, the washing machine. I just think it's so funny to roll around as a dirty, squeaky washing machine, shooting underwear at enemies and washing clothes. It has a unique method of getting around the level in the form of these service elevators, and while this definitely adds to the level's clunk, I just like it. The washing machine was a bit of an Easter egg in Banjo-Kazooie, so I'm happy it came back as a full-on transformation in Tooie. So, in all my videos on Banjo-Kazooie and Banjo-Tooie, I have yet to bring up Stop and Swap, which was a scrapped idea that would have required you to find secrets in Banjo-Kazooie to unlock rewards in Tooie. One of these rewards was an ice key that would have unlocked the Mega Globo, which you can take to this random Humba-Wumba in Isle o' Hags to access a secret transformation. Instead of changing Banjo, this would transform Kazooie from a bird to a dragon. This changes her appearance and allows her to breathe fire, and it's just super cool. You can keep her like this for the entire game if you want, making it incredibly unique. It's a really fun secret, and even though I prefer Kazooie just the way she is, I can't deny that Dragon Kazooie is one of the neatest things in Banjo-Tooie. But in my opinion, the best Banjo transformation is a traditional one, found in Jolly Roger's Lagoon. The submarine is really cool on its surface. It can putt around the vast underwater caverns of Atlantis, defeating enemies with torpedoes and sonar. There's a pretty fun minigame you can do with it, and it provides a great way to explore. But the thing that really sets the sub apart is the fact that you can complete many of the underwater jiggies and challenges with it, including the boss fight. It's just an entirely alternate method to tackle the level, and it's entirely up to you if you want to do these challenges with Banjo and Kazooie or the submarine. I can't believe more of the transformations didn't attempt this, and it's a real shame. This is the transformation mechanic at its best, and it's one of the things that makes Jolly Roger's Lagoon my favorite Banjo world. Thank you so much for watching. I really hope you enjoyed this video. Be sure to leave your thoughts in the comments below, and consider liking the video and subscribing to the channel if you haven't already. I hope you're doing well, and be sure to join me in the next video. But until next time, take care.